Hey, this is Powell. In this video we're going to go over the usage of UCD and the integration with the UCD, both the automation plugin and the source Docker tag importer plugin that work inside of UCD to give a better experience with Docker. The easiest way to start with UCD and Docker is to look at the project in our hub.jazz.net called UCD Docker Plugins Public, and it looks like it's owned by pQuerying. UCD Docker Plugins Public. Here's a README that describes some of the issues about getting started. Take a look at these. There's a pointer, a link to the plugin users guide that shows you a lot of details about the plugin that we're going to actually be demonstrating here in just a moment. And there is a another description of how to use the Docker images that contain the UCD server and another Docker image that contains the UCD agent. And that's described in this project that deals specifically with Docker. So the first thing I'm going to do, it describes a scenario of testing on a single computer, and it has a fig file that you can use to get started. So I'm going to do that. On my Mac, I'm running Vagrant, which is a layer on top of VirtualBox. So what I'm going to do, and so I'm essentially running Ubuntu on this computer. I'm going to make a directory called test. I want to test. I just copied the fig file from this link. Let's take a quick look at this fig file. Notice it contains one image for the UCD server, contains another image for the UCD agent, and then the agent is linked to the UCD server, and its name is server. So in the agent's hosts file, there will be a link called server that we can use to get to this agent. That we can use to get to the server from the agent. If you don't have Fig installed, you can find Fig. It's easy to download and install. So let's get started. I'm going to do a Fig up to run the UCD server and the UCD agent. Notice the first thing that happens is Fig pulls the image and it failed. That's because this Docker registry is a public registry and HTTP. To get around this issue, let's just pull it with Docker directly. You look at the Docker file that is in the default directory, you can see it has some options here, and these are the important ones. This is indicating that this CLM Docker 01 is an insecure registry, and it's okay for Docker to get to it or to read from it. Alright, so while that's going on, since Docker is able to pull this, you can see it's got quite a bit of file system that needs to be pulled. Well, that download is complete. So that pulled the server. Let's pull the agent as well. Okay, they're both down. Let's try the Fig up again. Okay. So this time you can see that Fig is able to start both of these Docker images. Okay, it looks like the server is up, and you can also see that the agent came up as well and seemed to have some problems. I can explain those problems to you now. Let's go ahead and log into, here's my other terminal session to the Ubuntu computer that's running these Docker images. I'm sorry, the IP address that I can use to access this computer is this, for me, it's been set up to be this second one. Let me go ahead and verify that I've got a good name for this on my Mac. 10.0.0.212. I've mapped this to the name pquerying VM so that I can navigate to that from my browser. So let me do that. It's pquerying VM 8080. Admin is the credentials. Got it. Now the first setting, and this explains why the agent was having problems. If we go down to the system settings, you can see that the agent needs to know how to get to the server. And the server, this string here is the same one that was in the Fig file and in the etc hosts file for the agent. So let me save that and go back to, and now go to the agents. Notice I hit the resources. I'm going to scroll over to the agents. And this is the error that was shown. Let me go ahead and restart this agent. You'll see some activity in the background over in this area as the agent restarts. Refreshing this screen shows that it's now moved offline. It's now in the process of connecting. And now it's online. While we're here in the Resources tab, let's go over to the Resources and create a top-level group that we're going to need later that contains this agent. I'm going to put all my agents into this top-level group. If you pull your cursor to the right spot here, you see there's an opportunity to add an agent. And of course there's only one. Alright, we're in pretty good shape. One more piece of configuration information that's required in the system settings again is to use the agent that we've now configured correctly to import images. And importing images is an important thing, important part of this operation that I'm going to demonstrate now. Now in the Components tab, you see there are components and there are templates. The automation plugins that have been that are used here created 3 different templates. One of these is for just Docker, to pull from Docker registries and to start those Docker images and containers on computers. It isn't related to the IBM Container Service or ICS at all. The other 2 deal with ICS, and the reason there's 2 is one of these deals with Docker registries that are not ICS, but the goal is to pull from a Docker registry and then execute things on either ICS or Docker. The other option is to use the ICS registry and then to execute those images on containers in ICS, the IBM Container Service, or on some Docker, some local on-premise Docker computer. Let's focus on the ICS registry. So one of the things the thing you do at this point is create a new component, and the name I'm going to give to this component is the name of the image, including both the Docker namespace and the Docker repository. Let me go over to the Bluemix area where I'm using the IBM Container Service and have it available to me. And now that I'm logged in, you can see that I've got the container service running here. This is the IBM Container Service that's going to allow us to deploy containers with Docker images. And this is how I created this originally. I'm going to search for containers, and you can see that there's the containers experimental. So I went ahead and added this earlier. There's a couple of important pieces of information here. This is my registry URL. Notice the registry URL also contains the Docker image namespace, which is Powell Querying 2, and it also contains this API authentication key. And this is the key that's going to be used later to log into this registry. Let's also take a look while we're here at the images that are available. There's a defect in either Firefox or the Bluemix dashboard that seems to have problems with cached web content. I'm going to clear my web content from the Firefox browser. I'm going to go back to the dashboard and start over. So here are the images that are in this registry. Notice two of these are ones I've added. Of course, Powell Querying 2 is the name of the registry namespace, but there's also two what they're called Docker repositories called Tracker 2.0 and Tracker 2.2. These are the images that I'm going to be using. Now the names of these images have both the namespace in them and the repository name. CS, and his name is Powell Querying 2 Tracker. The description is optional. There's some of these fields are grayed out. The ICS run options are any options that would be used on the ICE run command. And since this component can be run either on ICS or Docker, there might be special Docker run options. So the Docker host, typically for long-running or infinitely long-running services, which Powell Querying Tracker is a microservice, that you want to run this in the background in Docker. And so by default, the -d parameter is given. If there are other parameters that are required for the Docker run, then those can be added here as well. Finally, if you run on a Docker host, it's possible to supply both commands and then command line arguments, and they can be given here as well. Finally, you need to give a Docker registry password, and remember that was the key that was provided earlier. I'm going to store this key in a secure property in the systems property called ICS key, and I can access that using the this $ property substitution. Optionally, I could just type in the key right here, but I'm probably going to use this key in a number of different components. Let me go ahead and save this away. Let's make that key. So in the settings, in the properties, I'm going to add the property ICS key, make it secure, and then go back and grab this key and paste it into this value. Alright, that component is ready to go. Now before a component can be deployed, it needs to be added to a resource. Remember, the resources are the agents. I'm using the resources tab within the resources tab. And what I like to do is add the component to that agent. Easy enough. Now before I can deploy this component, the tracker component, I need to create an application. Let me create a new application. My tracker app contains both the tracker application and a tracker data layer. For now, let's play with just the tracker application and not worry about the data layer. So applications have environments and components. Let's add the component that we created, the tracker component, to this application. Now let's create an environment. So an environment is a set of resources and configurations that are environment specific. I'm going to call this one hybrid because I'm going to have parts of this application running on a hybrid environment where they're running on both ICS and on a local Docker host. Let's take a look at the hybrid environment. And now I'm going to look at the configuration, and there are properties for this configuration. There's only one component, but let's go ahead and focus in on it. And we can see that there's two places that you can deploy. You can either deploy on ICS or on one of your own Docker hosts. Let's change it to a Docker host. If there are particular, again, run options that are specific to the environment that we're running in, the ICS run or the Docker run options can be specified here. There aren't any for this application. All right, I think we're ready to run this component in an application. Let's take a look. Let's go back to the applications, open up the tracker app, take a look at the component here, and let's run the process in the hybrid environment. And we're going to go ICS to ICS or Docker. And remember, we configured it to not deploy on ICS, but to deploy on a Docker host, the same Docker host that's running the agent. And we pick a version. Whoops. I forgot to import the versions. Let me go back to the component, Powell querying to tracker, go to the versions, and import those versions. In the output log here, you can track the execution of the component import as it's executing. You can see there were some parameters that were passed to this routine. One of them was the image name, Powell querying to tracker, and the other one was the ICE registry name, along with some password information, etc. This configuration information that was passed to the import versions command, well, let's take a quick look and see if it imported the two versions. Remember, these were the two versions. Our hybrid environment, version 2.0. So if we say docker ps on my Docker host, of course we're running two things right now. We're running the UCD agent and the UCD server, and my goal is to now run tracker on this computer as well. Let's give it a try. I forgot something else. There needs to be a resource into the environment, and the piece I had forgotten was to add a base resource to the environment. Let's go back to the tracker app, try one more time. And as you might expect, this operation is broken up into two parts. Either a Docker pull and run, it's going to pull from the ICS registry and run it on a on-premise Docker host, or to run that exact same image on ICS. Let's open this part so we can see kind of what's happening. And we'll see a number of things. There was a Docker login to log into the ICS. We pulled the image down. We stopped it if there was an image previously running. Notice that step failed because there wasn't a version of tracker that was currently running on that computer. Then we removed it if it was there, and again that failed because tracker had never been installed on that computer before. And then we ran it. Well, let's take a look. Is it actually running? Yeah, there it is. It's running. It'll be running on the same host that the agent is running on. Well, let's do one more thing. I take that back. Let's do one more thing. Let's go ahead and run a second version of that image. Remember last time, and what's running now is 2.0. Let's go ahead and run 2.2. Notice this time the stop and the remove succeeded because the current version of tracker is running, and it did need to be stopped and removed. Now when we do a docker ps, we can see the tracker has changed from version 2.0 to version 2.2. Alright, I'll keep you posted on additional videos as they become available.